Yo, what's going on YouTube, and welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy Kevin Forte, and we continue our season preview series today as we take a look up north at the Ottawa Senators. So the Ottawa Senators, and before I start this video, shout out to my boy, I'll give him an extra one, hashtag yo, to my boy Ali Desh. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's get into the video. So the Ottawa Senators have had a really good offseason. Now, some people in Ottawa are a little skeptical because are they trying to push the issue here, trying to make the playoffs when maybe they just aren't a playoff team? Or are they really a respectable team that should be a force to be reckoned with this season? And that's kind of the weird spot with Ottawa this season, right? The Ottawa Senators look like a team right now, and with the additions they made, they could be a playoff team. The problem is they are in the toughest division in the entire National Hockey League. So do they really stand a chance at the playoffs? Now, if you look at the additions that they had this summer, it was pretty much up front and in between the pipes, and a little bit on the back end, and we'll get to that. Claude Giroux and Alex DeBrincat are the key additions up front. The Ottawa Senators now have two guys that might not both play center, but they are centers, in Claude Giroux and DeBrincat. DeBrincat has not signed a long-term extension, and again, that's part of the reason I think some Senators fans are a little bit worried. It's good that they're pushing for it, right? They're finally making that push for the next step. But at what cost? Are they costing possibly losing DeBrincat? Right? So that's one of the things, you've sacrificed the future maybe too soon. And I think that's why some Senators fans are a little bit on the fence about bringing in a guy like DeBrincat right now. But he definitely adds to the team right now and is definitely going to draw some appeal to the fan base. Claude Giroux, same thing. He's from Ontario. Actually, yeah, he's from Ottawa, right? He's an Ottawa native, and he comes back home. The captain of the Philadelphia Flyers for a decade, and has been with the Flyers for 2 decades, played with the Panthers at the deadline, and had a subpar run. But Claude Giroux is one of those guys that just is underrated at this point because of his age. He's not in the prime of his career, but is a very, very talented player. And the Ottawa Senators, it just seemed like a perfect fit. So the Senators add that 1-2 punch down the middle. And on the back end, again, this isn't necessarily an addition in terms of a trade or a free agent, but it's a guy they drafted a couple years ago, a pretty good hockey player, Jake Sanderson. The name sound familiar? You might want to get used to it in Ottawa. Jake Sanderson is a very, very talented defenseman. The Ottawa Senators selected a couple years back in the NHL draft. Jake Sanderson was the 5th overall pick back in 2020. He's been spending the last couple years at the University of North Dakota, and his numbers have been incredible pretty much everywhere he's gone. He had 26 points in 23 games as a defenseman in the NCAA with the University of North Dakota. So to say Jake Sanderson is a pretty good hockey player, at least in the collegiate level, he definitely fits that bill. He's a guy I would expect to probably by the end of the season, with the way this defense is, I would say he'll be a top 4 defenseman by the end of this season. I just think he's really that talented. It's not even a knock on the other guys. It's just he is that good. Now, that was their addition really on defense. Nothing else is changed. They kept Chabot, I hope. Chabot, Zaitsev, Hamonic, Zub, Holden, and Brandstrom is still TBD. He's still to be determined. He still needs to get a contract done. He's an RFA this summer. And the Ottawa Senators might end up trading him, depending on how things end up going. And then in between the pipes, they added Cam Talbot. I think this is the most underrated pickup for the Senators this offseason. Cam Talbot comes in. He was a really good goalie for the Minnesota Wild last year, and everybody kind of forgets that when they got Fleury fever down the stretch when he came in at the trade deadline. But Cam Talbot was very, very good during the regular season, the past 2 seasons in Minnesota, and I think he kind of felt snubbed, a little bit like, wow, so that's really what you think of me in Minnesota. So he's a guy that's probably motivated this summer, a little bit of extra push in his workouts this summer. I expect Cam Talbot to be a very motivated individual coming into Ottawa this fall. Last year, the Ottawa Senators, in terms of their numbers, their goals for and goals against, 26th in the National Hockey League. They struggled to score goals. I expect that to pick up with a 100-plus point scorer in DeBrincat and Claude Giroux as well. Goals against, I expect that to go down as well. They had 22 goals. They were 22nd in the National Hockey League for goals against, so that's 10th worst in the league. Again, that's something that needs to improve upon, but I think Cam Talbot coming in is that way of improving that stat as well. So then comes the big question, and that is, are the Ottawa Senators a playoff team next season? So let's put it this way. So if you look at the standings, if there's a scenario where the Ottawa Senators make the playoffs, Florida, Toronto, and Tampa would have to miss, right? One of those teams potentially. And you'd also have to hope that Detroit doesn't get better, which I think they will this season, and the Boston Bruins completely slide off with Krejci and Bergeron and now Zacha coming in. And unfortunately, I don't think the Senators are there. You know, it's kind of a shame because the Senators, I think, if they made these same additions last year, I still don't think they would have got in because you still had the Bruins. This is just, it's such a loaded division at the top, and it's difficult to get into the playoffs. The only real scenario where I see the Senators making the playoffs is Florida, Toronto, Tampa stay in, and they grab that fourth spot that might be open at the end of this season. And that's where I think Detroit, Boston, and Ottawa down the stretch in, the end of, in the beginning of the springtime are going to be fighting for that last spot in that potentially, if it's available, fourth spot, which is a wild card spot. So now, not only are you competing with Detroit and Boston for that fourth spot in the division, you also have to consider, with it being a wild card spot, the fact that there's potentially a team in the other division, in the Metropolitan, that can't take that spot. Whether that's the Islanders, Columbus, Washington, New Jersey, it could be any of those teams. So that's why somebody's going to be disappointed next spring, as there always is, but I just don't think the Ottawa Senators are there yet. I think they're still lacking a little bit on the blue line. I really like Sanderson. Again, this is where Sanderson, if he was another year or two older, I'd be way more confident in this group. But I can't sit here today and tell you, with as much as I like Artem Zub, Hamonic, and Zaitsev all in the top four, I just don't think that's good enough. And again, that's just how this kind of works. When you stack that up against the lineups of the other, basically 4 or 5 teams in that Atlantic division, they have better blue lines. And I just think that as good as Ottawa got this year, they have been bad for so long that this is just getting them back into the conversation of playoffs. So I think the Senators will be improved this season. I think they're going to be a fun team to watch. I think they're going to score some goals. Obviously bringing in DeBrincat is a huge, huge addition for this team. And let's not discount some of the guys that had really good seasons last year, like Josh Norris and Brady Tkachuk at the top of this list. The Ottawa Senators have a lot of potential ahead of them. I just don't think this is the year. They need to get a little bit better. They need some of that. Listen, it comes down to the blue line for me. I think that blue line needs to get a little bit more beefed up. And you look at some of the prospects are there. It's just going to take time. That's what's so frustrating about this. It's just taking time. You drafted the guys. You've got the guys in the right place. You just got to wait for them to develop. And that's where a Jacob Bernard-Docker or a Lassie Thompson or a Thomas Hamara or Dylan Hetherington or one of those guys comes up. That's when they kind of get to that next level. But listen, I like all those players I mentioned. I loved Hamonic as an Islander. He's not a top 4 defenseman on a playoff team. I just got to be honest. Same thing for Zaitsev and Zub. As good of a season as Zub had. All right, so that's it. I know, kind of a sad way to end today's video, but the Senators, I'm very excited for them. They're a really good team, and I love the addition of Cam Talbot. They're going to make some noise here. If Boston struggles out of the gate and Detroit isn't as good as we think they are, Ottawa could be that team. I would not bet money either way for Ottawa to miss or to make it, But let me know what you guys think down below. What do you think of the Ottawa Senators, and do you think they make the playoffs in 2023? Guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.